Hello everybody, Ben Woodruff here. This is a quick intro to the following video you're going to see. I was invited to Oregon to give a presentation for the Oregon Falconers Association, but my work schedule got in the way, wasn't able to go, so I recorded a video and I covered the topics they requested me to address, some different training techniques and troubleshooting problems, and there's some good information. It's going to be more scattershot than my regular videos where I pick one topic and really kind of go in super depth, but the information was still good enough that I thought it was worth sharing with everybody as well after the Oregon Falconers already had their banquet and had this video for themselves. So wanted to share it with everyone else and hopefully find it useful. Hello there, Ben Woodruff here. Greetings, Falconers of Oregon. It is a pleasure to be with you tonight. I'm sad that it is in this form. I was invited to come out and speak when you were going to have the meet earlier in the year, and then when it got pushed back, there's been some changes in my employment that required me to be on site and unable to be with you tonight. And so this was suggested as a way for me to still be able to share some thoughts and speak with you tonight. So I hope to come out and fly with many of you someday. You have some great hawking up in your neck of the woods, and you have some of the best falconers in the country. So who on earth am I? Not very important, but some of you who don't know who I am are like, who's this bearded crazy man? I will tell you. And I want to talk a little bit about how I get into falconry and kind of why I even do what I do. So I've been a falconer for decades and decades and decades, ever since I was in 4th grade, and it'll be pertinent to why I'm even speaking today. I got into it when I was a kid. When I was a very small child, when I was 1st grade, 2nd grade, I stumbled across this book, The Treasures of Tutankhamun, and I didn't know about ancient Egypt. I poured through it, and I already loved animals, but there were images of falcons everywhere on jewelry and headdresses and elaborate beadwork and gold falcons. And as a little kid, obsessed with old movies like Indiana Jones and the idea of treasure, I had never heard of falcons. I knew about hawks and eagles and owls, but a falcon, I was so young I didn't know. And that started my lifelong obsession with Lander falcons. It's not my favorite falcon to fly, but it is by and large my favorite falcon. I talk about them, teach them, fly them, and I have many, many reasons to collaborate on that. But by the time I was in 4th grade, I had kind of gotten out of the phase of the idea of falcons. I didn't know about falconry, and my mom bought me the book My Side of the Mountain. Very famous. This book is like the gateway drug to get you into falconry, especially back in the day. So many falconers got into falconry because of the book My Side of the Mountain. If you haven't read it, you should. And it changed my life. It was like, wait a minute, you can do that? You can forge a relationship of trust with a bird of prey and have them fly free, hunt for you, come back. I was amazed. And back then, there was no internet. And so to learn about falconry, all I could find in the library was these very old books, 1950s, 60s, some early 70s books, where the falconry laws that were in place were just kind of ignored or not known about. And they gave advice like, hey, if you have a farmer down the street where a chicken hawk is attacking their chickens, go down there and they'll let you trap. Here's how you build a trap. So we actually practiced falconry illegally for a few years unknowingly. And eventually somebody pointed out, no, there are laws and regulations, and I informed the government and got things squared away. They were very understanding. They're like, well, your bird's alive, so you must know what you're doing. But it led me into falconry. Now, this is in the age where books ruled and your sponsor's information was absolutely vital, and there was no way to collaborate. And after doing falconry for a few decades, I wanted to participate, and I wanted to help in a way that I did not receive help. in my era, getting into it, falconers were very secretive, very distrusting because of some government sting operations called Operation Falcon that had happened. Research it. It's pretty scary stuff. And so people didn't collaborate. They didn't share information. And nobody would tell me how to trap a bird. Even my own sponsor was like, why are you asking? Somebody put you up to that. So I had to blunder my way through it. And eventually, I wrote the book, Trapping Essentials. And that's usually what people like me to talk about, and usually people invite me out, especially I get invited to countries where trapping is illegal and they are looking to make it legal, and they'll invite me to come and talk to whatever government officials they have and explain that it's actually ethical and it's done right and everything. But I wrote that book kind of on the cusp when the internet, it was really becoming the main source of information. And with that in mind, I started seeing all these falconry videos everywhere. People were just posting things that really, a lot of these videos were young people who were, well, they didn't have to be young, but new to the sport. And they were so enthusiastic that what they were posting made falconry look bad. They were making mistakes on camera that are the kind of things that organizations like PETA and anti-falconers dream of getting a hold of and be like, see, look at this little 5 seconds of this clip. Look how bad falconry is. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to start making falconry videos too. Not because I think I know everything about falconry. Not because of that, but I thought if the bulk of the videos out there and people getting their information are kind of low grade, that I'm like, I would like to share, because writing books, I've written a few books on falconry, but you can help falconry more doing, in theory, good videos that are respectfully done. And so I started doing YouTube videos, which, it seems so dumb at first, but I've been amazed at the world collaboration, the things I learned from other people, and the ways you can help. I have to say, I very much love falconry itself and believe in it. Now, yeah, it's fun. Oh, it's great to have a bird. It's great to hunt with a bird, all that stuff. But I genuinely believe it is a good thing for humanity. It's ancient. Almost every culture in the world has had it. The United Nations recognize falconry as an intangible World Heritage sport. And in the United States, there's kind of a attitude towards it by a lot of people, but in most countries that have a much longer history with it, it is very honorable and very something to be proud of, that, oh, this is something we do. You think about maybe, in the Middle East, hunting with like Saker falcons, it's like heritage, or Mongolia, the eagle hunters. It's like, I have my eagle, my golden eagle, and I'm hunting foxes and wolves with an eagle from horseback. And it's very much part of the heritage. And I believe that kind of relationship is good. I think it's a great way to experience wildlife, to get us out in nature, the camaraderie we can learn, the history we can learn. But not only that, humans have a way of distancing ourselves from nature in every way. We don't want to think about it. It's fascinating, really. You think about, like, especially in America, all the meat we eat, we cut it in ways so it's not recognizable that it was an animal, that some sort of life was taken. Chicken wings are packed in a way that they don't really look like wings, so we don't think about them until we cook them. Dog food, instead of being a hunk of meat, it's meat and other ingredients that are compressed and cooked into a little star. And that's just distancing ourselves from nature. And our interaction with animals is usually cats and dogs for most people these days. And dogs were wolves, and we've selectively bred them to meet the needs that our society doesn't meet. So, a companion that's always there for us. But that's not really nature. And I believe that doing falconry, practicing falconry, keeps 1 foot in and 1 foot out of nature. You are halfway in, still your normal human society, but you've got another foot in, like, oh my gosh, like, there is life and death. This is part of it. And if the prey gets away, that's a victory for the prey. If the predator wins, it's a victory for the predator. He doesn't starve. And I think that way of thinking needs to be kept with humanity as we continue to progress to whatever our final destiny is on the trajectory we're currently on. It's also, I have been amazed, and if you had a different experience, that's fine, but my personal experience, any falconer in the world, any nationality, any religion, any age, any gender, instantly I can talk to them and they can talk to me. We have unification. We have understanding. It's disarming. It's wonderful. It builds bridges. So because of that, that is part of why I wanted to make videos. And I was making them, but when 2020 hit and the pandemic hit, I saw how valuable it could be. I always hate the strictness of the laws in the United States and the sponsorship system. I'm for it, but it's like, okay, it's strict. A lot of countries, there are no laws. And one specific incident, there was a young kid, just a young teenager in a Southeast Asian country who reached out to me at the onset of the pandemic. And the previous year, he had come across an injured kite, nursed it back to health, set him free, and it got him the falconry bug. But in his country, there's no mentorship. There's no big current history of falconry. So he was just looking online, and he's like, well, I'm going to go get my first bird. He went out for his first official bird. He went from a nest and got a white-bellied sea eagle. He's flying an eagle. He lives in an apartment on the top floor where he had a deck, and his country completely shut down. And he had no idea what he was doing, equipment-wise, food-wise, training-wise. And he's like, they're policing us, and I can fly off my roof, but and it's like, wow, an imprint eagle can go very wrong very fast. So a lot of the videos I made in 2020 were specifically to help him, and I thought, wow, this is actually really neat that people can help each other, can teach each other. And on my video, things that I have thought were just absolute doctrine my whole life, I've had people reach out to me and correct me and be like, actually, here's more of the story you didn't know. And I love that. I love that aspect. I curse the digital age, but I'm also a beneficiary of it, as we all are. So that being said, for this specific video, I was asked kind of a list of things to kind of comment on, to teach about, to kind of give my view. But let me tell you my perspective on falconry, on everything in life, but especially on falconry, is the principle-based idea, which means if you have a problem and somebody else just gives you the answer, and you're like, hey, I got the answer and it works, you didn't grow or learn as much as if you thought through, wait a minute, why is this happening? Why is there this problem? If you watch my channel, my friend and former apprentice John Griggs, he builds muscle cars and he builds Harleys and takes them apart. We work on motorcycles together. And he taught me the principle of troubleshooting. I would come, when we were first getting to know each other back in our 20s, and, my car's having a problem, and I'd be all freaking out like, I don't know what's wrong. He's like, well, where is the sound coming from? What is the actual issue? Well, what components lead to that part, and what comes after? What are the things that could be wrong? And he taught me the principle of reductive troubleshooting, and we both apply that to falconry. What's the bird doing? It's grabbing my face, or it keeps flying off. And somebody might give you a good answer, and it fixes the problem, but it's all the better if you understand why. Why are they doing that? And we don't always know the answer. There's things that I keep asking myself. Merlins, wonderful falcons. Merlins, for some reason, are prone to biting their feet and biting their toes, even all the way down to the bone in captivity. I know of no other raptor species that does that. They're closely related to all of their falcons. They can be crossed with other falcons and hybrids. Why is that with Merlins? Now, I don't know the answer yet. That's something I still am troubleshooting and trying to figure out. I've come up with band-aid approaches to stop it if a bird ever has that problem that work. But you got to think, troubleshoot, ask yourself, why are they really doing this? That's a principal way. So even though I am sharing some of these thoughts, again, I was given kind of a list of points that would maybe be good to talk about and give thoughts on. That doesn't mean that whatever I say is the answer, nor do I claim it is. There are ideas that work, but I also try to share the principle behind it and what we need to ask ourselves. And always remember this too, everyone has something to teach you. Falconers are among the most, worldwide, falconers are some of the most opinionated humans on the planet. That's fine, but you got to remember, everyone has something to teach you. You may, I've been practicing falconry for 60 years, and some apprentice or pre-apprentice comes up and has a question or says something, you still have something to teach you. Might be how to do something wrong, what not to do. It might be like extra understanding into what you're already doing, or it might be a new perspective that helps you just better understand something. Everybody you encounter has something to teach you, even if what you're doing works just fine already. So hopefully what I share can be helpful or entertaining, interesting, and I know there's people watching this who have no idea who I am and already have great falconry, and have people who are brand new. So I hope we can have some fun with this. So the first one that I was asked about was the problem of a bird carrying, which is where, your bird's on a kill, or maybe it's on even just the lure, and you approach and they take off. This is such a universal problem that it goes back to ancient times. I collect, just online, I save pictures of falconry art from ancient times all around the world. I love seeing posture, behavior training techniques that we still do today. It's like, it's thousands of years old. And I especially love, in Asia, especially China, you'll see where the goshawk is on the ground, mantling over a kill, and the falconer is crawling over on their belly, so they don't get attacked, and so the bird doesn't take off with the kill. And so this is a problem that we all face. Falconry is not normal. The human part is the weird part. Everything else is normal. It is normal for a bird of prey to hunt and kill. And we are just being a part of that. So you got to think about it. I could give you, I have a principle I teach, and I'll actually put a link in this video. And hopefully when you're running this video, you can give the link. I'm doing this as a private video, but anybody with the link, you can watch it. And I have a technique, I didn't invent it, but I came up with it on my own. Nobody taught it to me, and then I hear other people do it too, that I call spiral and stomp. But before I mention that, if you are troubleshooting and trying to figure out, you got to think, what do we do? What do falconers everywhere do? Here's the bird on the ground, and you're towering above them, right? And then you start to kind of hunch over, and then kneel, maybe crawl, maybe even lay. So then you have an intuitive understanding that standing is more intimidating. So my brain says, well, I want them to be totally fine with me towering over them, rather than being like, okay, you got to be delicate about this. Why? They have a mind. Raptor minds we know can learn. We know they're highly intelligent birds. Why can't they acclimate to a new situation? We've seen them do it in the wild. We've seen raptors adjust to human-caused situations and be like, hey, I can adapt to a new way of thinking. I'm a Cooper's hawk and can learn to hunt a bird feeder. I know a Cooper's hawk that will chase every day birds from a bird feeder into a window intentionally, and it knows the window's there, thump, and then they fall and it grabs them, and it knows. So the basic idea is to just acclimate them to death. And the spiral and stomp is you get them used to when they're eating off anything. This is early stages of training. You start walking in closer and closer, circling in further and further, and they're on a leash. They're not going anywhere. They're not going to take off. And then as they're getting used to that, you do that from the beginning until finally you start stomping your feet around them and even jumping over them. I straddle and walk over, or I literally hop and then run, jump. And I get them that acclimated to them. And it works great. It's certainly not the only way. And again, you can look in the link to this video, and I'll provide a link to the spiral and stomp video. It's an older one, but it's still good information. But again, the principle is, hey, I want to teach the bird to be okay with something far crazier, like just, and they do good at it. The next one I was asked about was screaming. Birds that are very loud and just scream. Now, by and large, almost always, the reason a bird screams has something to do with food. Vocalization can also have something to do with territory, with aggression, but usually it's food aggression, or something to do with mate calling or something like that. I have a great horned owl that would never shut up in this time of year. She's always hooting because she hears my voice. It's like, oh, I'm imprinted on him. It's breeding season. That's not what we're talking about. Vocalizations related to food are counterintuitive to a wild bird. If you are a predator, you want to be quiet. You want to be stealthy. So a bird that's meh, meh, meh will make you want to rip your hair out. Now I'm going to kind of divide this in half. Falcons, hawks. Falcons can be really obnoxious, but most large falcons are training to go up. If they're in the sky, they're working out. They're not vocalizing. They're not screaming while you're breathing and trying to do this athletic flight. It's not going to happen. It's usually okay. But still, you don't want them screaming at home. Hawks, on the other hand, you're carrying, and if they're just... So I don't have a set answer because there's too many scenarios for this video where I'm going to talk about other subjects as well. I will say, look at the food problem and say, what is their relationship to food? What are they an imprint? Do they think I'm their parent? Then you got to think outside of the box and say, okay, I've got to redirect their thinking of food. For example, if I raise an imprint, I don't want them to see me feeding them. I want to bring them to food. So, and that will bring up later on, it's like, I was on his fist, and he brought me to a rabbit, and I flew after and I got it. So if you can redirect and have them not think of you as a parent, that's fine. And you might say, I have a bird that isn't an imprint, and that happened. The complexity of the mental state of a bird is something we're still unraveling. There are non-imprint goshawks that readily elicit artificial insemination. It's like, but you're not an imprint. But the exchange of food has built that bond. Because you got to remember, too, food is the language of social bonding in raptors. Everybody wants to kill you and take your food, or kill you and make you food, except for your parent or your mate, and your parent will do it once they've left you. If they encounter you again in the wild, they will try to take your food. It's a dog-eat-dog world. So what that relationship is, you've got to troubleshoot. You got to think through and say, how do I redirect the relationship between me and food? And if you do it wrong, of course, then they're just going to food bait. A parent leaves. Right as babies get extremely vocal is when the parents start flying towards the nest, dropping prey, and they're like, they go after it, and the parents leave, and then eventually the parents just ditch out, and the babies scream for a few days, and then are like, oh, and start to quietly wander off and hunt on their own. If you have become that or always were that parent figure and you never left, you have a problem. It can be all the way outside of the box to being like, hey, if you know this is a potential problem, have somebody else raise your growing baby and then switch it over to you once it is fledged. But the other thing, too, is just getting out in the field and letting them hunt and hunt and hunt. So many problems in falconry, especially with hawks, can be quite easily fixed by repeated successful hunts. And if you can't, then throwing baggies where they still think that they've hunted. And that will bring us to aggression, which I'll save at the end because aggression is one of my absolute favorite topics. Now, I want to talk about baiting. It was one of the things I was asked to mention and talk about. Baiting is, of course, when a bird, is jumping off the fist and flapping and gets back up. There's two ways. There's two kind of approaches. Is the bird baiting in a reactive way, or is it baiting in a glitch way? So normally when a raptor, and most animals for that matter, are presented with something unexpected or something that they might be afraid of, a potential danger, they react with fight or flight, which is I'll go and attack, or put my feet up, or I'm going to try to get away from it. Fight or flight. And baiting often is that, especially in the early stages of training. So we're talking about, well, what if we have a bird that keeps baiting? So you have to do the troubleshooting and say, okay, if I was in a room and somebody moved and they baited, that's reactive. But is this a bird that just baits no matter what and just flipping out seems all the time? Even though it's trained, you can fly it to the fist and it's still bleh. It's a lot more rare. Ironically, it's very common. Well, not ironically, but it's surprisingly common with captive-bred gyr falcons. I don't know why. But in those early stages of training, a captive-bred gyr, it's been perfectly fine. And it gets to a certain age, it's like, hey, just got to paint all over the place. It's like, come on, bird. And with that being the case, if it's reactive, for me, usually the best thing to do is acclimation. Just getting them really used to whatever thing could be scary, and everything, letting them eat in the presence of whatever might be scary, whatever might make them afraid. Can't always do that. But if you can set up situations, put a dog in the room, have the TV going, have whatever over here keep scaring, and one of your kids, redhead, is like, bleh, always scaring them. And have them eat in front of that so they get used to, wow, I'm safe eating when I'm vulnerable in front of that. But if it's more of a glitch, in the most extreme cases, it's best not to keep the bird, especially if it's a wild bird, and release it. But water can be one of your best friends. A little bit of a spray under the wing, or in the summer with a new goss, actually not a new goss, a new gyr that's captive bred that's flipping out and will overheat. Then, a lot of falconers do this, is you'll gently get them wet. not their head, but everything else. Put them in their bath pen and gently get them so they really soak in the water, and then have them out and spend a big long training session holding them. And they're like, oh. But again, this all the way from medieval times, we have records telling us, hey, if your falcon is baiting and baiting and baiting, just get them wet under the wings, quite substantially. And they're like, oh. And somehow that helps reset their brains, especially with falcons. I used to do a lot of presentations with one of my eagles, Holly, and she was great, but she ended up getting West Nile virus and was totally blind while she had it. And when she got back out from that, she was partially blind with weird depth perception issues in one eye. And in the summer, for some reason, that made her want to bait more while we traveled. I put her on an education permit and taught with her. But what I would do is, right before I left, I'd go out in my yard, put her on the grass, and I'd take a hose, and I would drench her feet, drench all the feathers on her legs, drench the brooding feathers under the belly and under the base of the tail that they, and drench those and drench under the wings. And then I put a hood on her and we'd go, and she's just absolutely fine. She's riding, I'm fine. And then we'd get to the show and she'd be dry by then, and she'd be fine for the show and fine going home. And it works. So water can be one of your best friends. It's kind of the Hail Mary pass to kind of help with that. Now, one of the questions I was asked about was a passage bird versus an imprint bird. Just some of the pros and cons, and there are many, and it depends on the bird. The general idea is that an imprint is something that you can shape and make into whatever you want. If you're doing things right, you can be like, I want to train this sharp-shinned hawk to hunt semi-trucks. You can. You can literally train them to go after anything, to hunt in strange new ways, and I love that aspect. Imprints are also, if you train them right, usually a lot more social and fun. They didn't grow up with that, I have to fight my siblings, and then my parents left me and I had to learn to hunt. I was almost starving for a couple of weeks there when I was learning to hunt, and I learned it was a harsh world, an eagle tried to kill me. They don't have any of that, jadedness. And an imprint's just like, hi, we're friends. They're very playful. A lot of people now are using toys in the early ages with their imprint hawks and falcons and playing around, almost like a parrot or a dog. I love that. I do love imprints. The bad thing is, if you're too much of a food imprint instead of a social imprint, you do run into those problems of misdirected aggression, where they think, oh, you're my mom and dad, and you never left, so I should just, at the age, a young bird at the age where they're starting to get aggressive and hard-pen, and they're starting to want to hunt, and the parents, instead of feeding them or bringing them food, are bringing them a maimed animal and dropping it and making them chase it. That is the age where that bird might start to get aggressive towards you because you don't leave. And so it's like, all right. And you have to think through with that. You don't want that to happen. So that's one. There are huge potential issues for aggression and vocalization with imprint birds. But again, they can be such a joy. One of the good things about an imprint also is the guarantee that you have them. I would rather fly a passage goshawk than an imprint, or better yet, a bird that is still within the grove that it hatched and the parents just left a day or two ago. That's the perfect bird. That's the goshawk I would like to fly. But you know what? Might not be able to. And so if I want to guarantee that I can get a goshawk here in Utah, then climb to a nest and get a baby, raise it as an imprint. Then I 100% sure I have one. Not like, well, we're going to go on the ridgetop and try to find a passage goss. Oh, shoot. I was planning on it all summer and it didn't happen. We didn't have any fly through this year. That's kind of the thinking on it. So that is something to definitely remember. One of the benefits of a passage bird is that they know what they are doing. They know how to fly, they know how to land, they know how to hunt. And so there is much more value in you to them. If you want to view it as in a human way, imprints are spoiled brats. You have one bird, you don't have the whole clutch, right? And so you are just raising them. They never had to compete for food. You gave them a guaranteed meal. They never went hungry. They never had to squabble for it. A passage bird, once it learns to trust you, usually they're really good. They're loyal not because they view you as a parent figure, because it's like, this dumb idiot's giving me free food. Hey, he drives me out to guaranteed hunting opportunities and holds me or lets me get up and flushes the prey for me. It's like, they value, and maybe I'm humanizing them too much, so forgive that. I'm not saying that they think directly in those terms, but I've definitely seen that passage birds have an appreciation that is refreshing compared to imprints. And knowing how to knowing how to fly, also hunt, but fly is more valuable than you think. Falcons especially. A big falcon, for it to learn how to fly, to land, to stoop, is trickier than you think. And I've never had a problem training an imprint to do it, but if you have a bird who already knows how to put on the brakes without running into things, that's great. And so I love that with the passage bird. One more thing I want to mention is aggression. And that's one of the things I was asked to talk about. And that's one of my absolute favorite topics. Nobody wants aggression. Nobody wants a violent bird. Nobody wants to get grabbed in the face. And normally, kind of the nomenclature, what we're talking about, what we have on YouTube videos, what we have in books, what your sponsor teaches you is typically aggression is bad. And I categorically disagree. Aggression towards humans is bad. But aggression is natural, normal, and cannot be taken away. There's nothing you can do to... And if you think you have gotten rid of an aggressive problem, you actually haven't gotten rid of the aggression. You've properly redirected it. And that is how I view it. View that there is aggression from your bird, and imagine an imaginary target floating around, and you have to, with your training techniques, put the target on the proper things. If that target's on your face, you're in trouble. If that target's on your feet anytime you wear sandals for some reason, you're in trouble. But that should be squarely put on prey. And other retrieval devices, a glove, a lure, sure. But you don't want too much of that aggression on a glove or a lure, or that will become something to be possessive of. So the general rule is, not a rule, let me rephrase. The general principle that I like to teach when it comes to the principle of aggression is redirect. Properly direct aggression. Don't think you can get rid of it. Direct it where it should be. And that's why if I don't know your situation, you're like, my bird's really aggressive. The first thing I say is get rid of the association of food with you and hunt the crap out of them. Just hunt. And they're like, oh yeah, that's where I'm supposed to be impaling talons, is on my dinner, not on the falconer that's training me. But to be more specific, if you're trying to troubleshoot through it, especially with budios, accipiters, and eagles, falcons aren't as bad, but the principle still applies. I make lures. I make them in mass. I make every kind of lure you can imagine. I've made every pattern on earth because everybody's so picky and has different opinion about lures. My personal lures, I typically don't have any way to attach food. In the early training, I have them come to the lure for... You're training a bird to come to the glove, fly to my fish, to eat some food. Great. Once you get them doing that, you've built a bond, you've built that trust. But the problem is if you keep doing that, or especially you have too large of a reward over time, that glove itself becomes a mobile prey item in their eyes. And since you are attached to them, that is kind of translated as you're trying to steal it and harm them. And so they will start mantling over the glove and might even grab you in the face. Not good. So if you can reduce the importance of food on the glove, good. If you have a problem bird that is already aggressive, don't ever have food on the glove, ever. And on the lure, it's really, especially with accipiters and eagles, there's so often where they get so lure bound and they're like, I'm going to kill you. And so what I do is I at first put really big meals on the lures when I'm teaching what a lure is. Come to the lure. Great. You're going to eat off the lure. And then as soon, 4, 5, 6 times, 7 at the most, then I start calling them to the lure. And once they are on it and they're mantling, and they're like, wait, where's the food? Then at arm's length, I dangle a piece of meat and they're like, huh? And I chuck it. They jump off. And then I grab the lure, hide it. I let them eat the full amount of what they had. And once they've eaten it, they're like, wait, I was on something. And then I got this meat. And there's nothing to be aggressive towards. They might walk around. In the case of eagles and accipiters especially, watch that tail. Watch the hackles. Watch the neck position. Are they still looking aggressive? Once they're not, once they've been convinced, well, I guess whatever it was I caught, that lure, I guess I ate the whole thing because I see nothing. You can pick them up with your bare hands at that point. The aggression's gone because it was on an item, and that item has been disappeared, not stolen. They left it for the food, and then they were considering, okay, now, with eagles, I'll do a big hunk of meat, and I'll chuck it 8 to 10 feet. And you could be like, well, the birds are fast. They might jump up and get in your hand. That's true. And it just depends. You have to learn that yourself. With goshawks and Cooper's hawks, I will usually do, depending on them, when I'm figuring out their speed, their reflexes, their temperament, is that I have one in between stage. You go to the glove, then the lure with food on, and then the lure without food. But instead of throwing food, what I'll do is, while they're mantling on the lure, I will tie the meat to a piece of string, and I'll dangle it down, and they're like, huh? So they don't even see my hand chuck it. There's no association. They're facing away from me, mantling. Their tail is towards me. Their head is that way. And I dangle with the rope, dangle that meat down, and they're like, oh! And then I kind of give it a toss, and then they pull it out from the string, and then I pull the lure, and then I go from that eventually to then they're used to looking forward, and so, boom, I got the lure. All right. I walk behind them, they're looking around, and I chuck the food over their head in front of them, away from me. They don't see my hand, they don't see me chuck it. They lunge towards it, they got it, I take the lure, and then once they're done eating, same thing. I wait, they walk around, put in the tail, and they're good. You pick them up and you keep going. That is how I like to do it. I love aggression. Properly directed at the prey, and troubleshoot it. Just because I'm sharing these ways does not mean it is the way to do things. I'm just sharing ways that have worked for me when I've shot through the problem. But you got to remember that with everything in falconry, everybody has something to teach you. We have thousands of years of history around the world to learn from. There's a reason. There's a lot of people who often are negative towards falconers. There's that have birds. There are educators and rehabbers who, falconers are terrible, but they happen to have an education hawk or eagle or something wearing falconry equipment, being trained with falconry techniques. I know at some zoos I've been to where they've ripped on falconers, and I'm like, sitting there with a falconer's glove from a falconry supplier, I know where you got it from, and you've got Almery jesses and a Sampo swivel and a braided, fox loop leash. You got all these things on, and you got a hood from a falconry supplier, and it's like, you're using all of the falconry equipment and techniques because they work, okay? So we have thousands of years of history, heritage, and techniques to lean on, but that does not mean we're at the end. And moving forward, one of the things I really like to advocate is that past history is both our blessing and our curse. The blessing is we know how to work with these birds. The curse is we cannot help but view these life forms through this lens of past thinking, of people who had no idea about germ theory or space travel or anything. They didn't know these things. They didn't know the future. They didn't know points about consciousness. I am obsessed with learning about the intelligence of other life forms. I do love space exploration. I think it's great that we are trying both from Earth and in space. The concept of life being out there, good. And I know some people are like, no, it doesn't matter. Fine, I'm just saying I think it's neat. But you know what? Are we trying at all to understand the life forms on our own planet? Falconers, you as a falconer are uniquely poised to weigh in on that discussion. Most people sit in their armchair and, well, I think this and this about animals in the wild. You ever been in the wild? Well, I saw an elk once. Cool. Did you work with it? Did you learn about it? We have elephants that bury their dead. My macaws, I train at my work. I have all kinds of animals, and I have some macaws. And they will communicate, they'll squawk, do normal parrot body language. But when it comes to... If they're not getting the message across, because I've got specifically among several of them, I've got a blue and gold macaw and a red-fronted macaw that are a mated pair. They're not the same species of macaw, and so some of the body language and squawks don't quite match up. But they've learned English, and they will default and use English across the room if they're not getting the message across, if they're being emotionally needy or they need something, and they're doing the squatting the mouth thing and specific keys, and the other one's not getting it. Then it'll be like, love me, snuggle me, love me, come here. They will say that, and then he's like, oh, and he'll fly over to her and end our training session. So it's amazing, and you can be like, well, they're just dumb animals. It's like, hey, aren't we all? The idea of symbolic thinking, the idea to recognize that this word, this sound, this body language means something. Raptor's doing the same thing. Okay, maybe it doesn't say, hello, how are you? Give me a cookie, like a parrot would, but a raptor that learns, oh my gosh, this tanned leather lure object without food. You used to give me food on it. There's no food now. And I've learned an extra step that if I fly to it, when you whistle, that food's going to appear. Doesn't take that much intelligence, but it takes symbolic thinking. It takes no different than a parrot can learn that a word represents an object. And so, as falconers, we are closer in so many ways to wild animals than anyone else on the planet. Basically, all our other animals, horses, dogs, cats, all these other domesticated animals, may be intelligent, but they're not fully subjected to the rigors and stresses and thinking of the wild. And wild animals, you're just I'm looking at the wolves in Yellowstone and observing their wild behavior. But as falconers, we are working with and training wild birds, or birds that may be captive bred, but their thinking is still completely connected to through a wild lens. We can weigh in on that discussion. We can weigh on the discussion of how intelligent are animals, and that is why I encourage all of you. I hope it was fun to share these things that work for me, but let's brainstorm new training techniques, new ways to unlock the intelligence and abilities of a raptor, and just how close we can truly forge a bond. We like to dismiss them. We like to be like, they're hungry. I'm a hunting partner. That's it. Yeah, but you know what? If you've been doing it long enough, ask any falconer, and you see exceptions to the rule. We have no problem with a parrot forming a bond, with a parrot cuddling and wanting affection. Just think of raptors as the introverted version of a parrot that isn't able to verbalize in human ways, but look for signals and cues they give. And I think as we move as a falconry community into the future, worldwide, that is something that should be part of our focus. Hold on to the heritage, learn from it, and also pioneer new ways in thinking. I hope falconry continues on. At the 50-year NAFA meet, the 50-year anniversary, I painted the NAFA meet print, the poster. And I remember thinking, I hope I'm still alive at the 100-year anniversary. And I'm like, and I hope falconry is still alive and going. So let's share. Let's be open-minded. Let's try to build camaraderie. It's understandable that we're opinionated. I'm not telling falconers not to be opinionated, but let's be open-minded and try to build connections instead of just shooting people down. We don't need 1 trillion falconers, but it's better for the sport and for humans in general if falconry lives on into the future. So I thank you all for letting me part of this. And again, I appreciate your patience and understanding that I wasn't here in person. And I hope you check out my YouTube channel if you haven't already. I always like to hear new ideas of what you'd like me to talk about. And I hope I can make it out and fly with you all sometime. But hope you have a great evening, great banquet, and as always, happy hawking.